So hello and welcome. Happy Friday. Today is Friday, May the 6th, and this is episode number 158 of Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers. I'm Frederick Dunn, and this is the way to be. So I'm glad that you're here. It's 53 degrees Fahrenheit outside. That is 12 degrees Celsius, and it's raining. Yesterday was the only clear day we had. Thursday, previous to Thursday, it's been raining every single day, and it's been cold. It's raining now, it's going to rain tomorrow, and it's a weird spring. And I know the minute that we get a series of warm days, the bees are going to swarm. So I hope we're out there, or at least prepared to manage our bees. By the way, the opening sequence was wood ducks. Those are wood ducks here on my own property, on my own pond. I went out there before sunrise and had camouflage equipment on and made that video sequence for you. So that was fun just today, by the way. And another treat that's coming along. At the very end of the video, after the credits, if you keep watching, you'll see the Way to Be Academy building is now all framed up, and there's a time-lapse sequence showing how they threw it together. So that's underway as well. If you're brand new, welcome. If you want to know what we're going to talk about, please look down in the video description below, and you'll see all the topics that we're going to discuss in order, as well as pertinent links and other reference information that might help you along. So let's get started. Question number one, right out of the bat, right out of the gate, right off the bat. Rob Alfred, Dalton, PA. Is a drone that was laid by a laying worker just as viable as a drone that is laid by a mated queen? So for those of you who don't know, we have 3 castes of bees in the beehive. The queen, usually there's just one, although on some occasions there are more than one queen. There is more than one queen. And there's the male, which is the drone, and that's your reproductive resource for the colony that flies out and mates with other queens that are not related to that colony, and they kick off another colony when that queen is mated. And then we have the worker bees, which are potentially fertile. So workers are infertile. And I won't get into diploid and haploid, but the workers are haploid. And that means that they are female and they have reproductive organs. Diploid means like the drones, they are only male. And they can't reproduce, they can't do diddly niddly. So, if we are missing the queen, for example, after about 3 weeks, so after 21 days, the worker bees could activate their ovaries and begin laying eggs. Those will be diploid or haploid eggs. They'll be diploid because the worker bee can only produce infertile eggs. Sounds weird that's infertile, even though it produces a living animal, but it will only produce drones, so only male bees. The reason that they do that is the colony failed to replace a queen. So once the queen's gone, once you get what's referred to as a laying worker, things are on a downhill slide. And that means that they're producing drones as a final effort to continue the genetics of that colony, even though it has no way to recover. So then the other part of that is often these laying workers, they lay their eggs everywhere. So they lay their eggs in worker-sized cells. So when you're looking at a frame of brood, usually at the periphery or at the bottom, you'll see larger cells, and those are for drones, and those are made by workers when the colony is healthy and production is high and resources are plentiful, and they're making room for the queen to go and lay her eggs in those large cells. And that's when we produce the largest, strongest, healthiest, most well-fed drones. But then when a laying worker kicks in and they're scooting around, sometimes depositing more than one egg at a time, and another way that you can identify that is their rear ends don't reach all the way to the bottom of the cell, so often you'll see eggs deposited in multiples right along the side wall of that cell instead of on the bottom the way the queen does. So because they're laid in worker cells, the drones that come out of those cells tend to be smaller. And often people refer to these as bullet cells, and that's because the diameter of that cell is smaller. Therefore, the cap for that cell, once it goes into its pupa phase, is more convex than normal and far more convex than a standard worker pupa would be capped with. So we have smaller drones less capable than those made by queens. So they are not equal. Now they could, because the competition is between other drones. So a drone made by a laying worker competing head to head with a drone made by a fertile queen that's completely healthy and the colony is healthy. Those drones will generally outcompete for the queen. And where does this competition take place? In a drone congregation area where virgin queens fly out and they mate high in the air. And you'll see what's known, you may not see it, but people that observe drone congregation areas, they call it the drone comet. Literally thousands of drones flying after these queens, following their pheromone and competing with one another to physically mate with the queen. And that's why these layer produced drones, these working bees that are laying worker drones, not worker drones. What's wrong with me today? Anyway, worker bees that lay eggs produce drones, and these drones are in fact inferior to those that are made by queens. So, sorry about that. Man, I'm off to a rough start. Moving on to question number 2, Sean Meister. Sean is a frequent viewer and commenter, so I have 2 questions related to the same thing, but I wanted to mention Sean's also. So I have a new one for you. It says, I've never heard anyone else talk about, and I found a female summer tanager hanging out around my hive, picking off the bees one by one. She goes right to the entrance in the morning, eats her breakfast. It's like seeing her. It says it like seeing her, but I think he says I like seeing her, but I feel so bad for the bees. I read that bees and wasps are their favorite foods. Okay, so keeping Sean's question in mind, let's go on to question number 3 because they're going to combine together. Christy Romanko from Troy, Missouri. We started keeping bees 3 years ago, and your channel mentored us because we couldn't get a hands-on mentor. Thanks for the lessons. Thanks for watching, and thanks for being here. By the way, this would be a good time to click the like button so that you know that you've seen this one because this is a lengthy series. It says we're now mentoring other couples. This morning I received a picture of one hive with bird poo all around the landing board and wooden pallet. Her hives are kind of out in the open, and a tree line on the north side is 30 yards away are birds picking off her bees. I suggested that they look into hive visors, but do you have other wisdom to impart? Okay, so this leads me to another thing, because it is springtime. The birds are all getting territorial, they're doing their nesting, and there's a lot of controversy about birds that eat bees. Who knew? Well, I mean, I've known. Anybody that's watched birds and bees for a while, you have to consider how big of a problem is it really. Now, depending on where you live and where your hives are located and what species of birds are nesting near where your hives are, you could have a profound impact on the numbers of bees that the birds are eating. Not every bird species will eat bees, but there's a lot of them that do. And that's what I thought it would be fun to talk about today. Now, when you go to do research on this, you'll find that it's kind of difficult to find out exactly what the damages are from specific bird species. And that's because it hasn't proven to be significant enough to really be a problem for beekeepers overall. Because if it were, there'd be a lot more going on. But the first thing that came to mind when I heard this question was there's something called scatology. So since you've got a whole bunch of bird poo around, you could collect the bird poo together and see what its composition is, and you can see if there's bits and pieces of bees in it. And before we get going on the list of birds that do feed on your honeybees, I would like for you to take a moment and write down in the comment section under this video which bird species you have personally seen catching and consuming honeybees. Because that would be interesting too. And don't forget to write in that comment what part of the world you're in. Because I realize when I look at this, I think North America. But there are species of birds all over the world that do impact honeybee colonies. So it's kind of interesting. I'll be interested to see what your comments are. So anyway, scatology, get in there with your magnifying glass, or if you're lucky enough to have a dissection microscope, you can look in there and see if you see bee feet, bee heads, abdomens, thorax. The thorax is where all the protein is, so sometimes you'll see them cast off the abdomen or whacking on a stick or a twig or something on a tree branch, and then they just eat the head and thorax. And that's because that's where the protein is and the bees get the most out of it. But there are some things that are interesting here. One of the most controversial species, and I'll explain why, of birds. Purple martins. So here's the thing, you get into all these discussions back and forth, and that's because there's a lot of beekeepers that actually keep purple martins. And when they keep these purple martins, they're hanging in gourds or synthetic gourds or imitation gourds. And because they nest in groups, it seems counterintuitive that you would have all these purple martins around in the same area where you have an apiary full of honeybees. But the good news and the bad news is they do eat some of your honeybees. The good news is they don't eat a lot of the honeybees because the purple martins could care less about the honeybees. And they're kept because if you're a gardener, purple martins keep a whole bunch of insects out of the air. So they do feed on insects. Bees are part of their diet, tiny part, not significant. And I'm also going to link a study down in the video description so you can follow up and read about some of these yourself. Very interesting stuff. No point in getting into heated debates about it. Study the bird poo if you're in doubt. But there's another bird called the honeyguide. There's black-throated honeyguides and scaly-throated honeyguides. And this is a very interesting bird, not native to the United States. But when people would go out and actually locate wild colonies of honeybees and rob them out, honeyguide birds would make noise and get the attention of these people and lead them down the path to actual cavities with bees in them. Because these birds, this is very interesting stuff. So I wish I had an ornithologist to talk to about this. If you can think of a really good ornithologist that might know some of this crossover information, please let me know their name so I can maybe reach out to them for part of my Interviews with Experts series. I would really love to talk with someone who's keyed in on this from the ornithology end of things. Because these honeyguides led people knowing that they would destroy the beehives and rob out their honey. And then the honeyguide birds, black-throated or scaly-throated, would go after the larvae from these hives after they were destroyed. So it's a symbiotic relationship they had, getting people to do what they needed them to do so then they could reap the benefits after harvesting from the leftovers. Swifts are another bird that's known to eat honeybees. Honey buzzards are honeybee specialists. The name is in the species of bird. Great spotted woodpeckers, they also go after larvae and things like that. Shrikes, blue tit, house martin, cardinals. I was surprised to see cardinals on there. I have cardinals all over the place around here, but there again, it's not that honeybees are their primary diet. It's that honeybees can compose part of their diet. And what else do we have in here? So they did some studies also to see for people that were in areas where they had birds that specialize in eating honeybees. There's something called a mist net. Now I didn't look up mist nets because there again it's not going to apply to me, and I also don't think it's going to apply to people in North America in general. Very few of us are being wholesale hit by any bird species. But these mist nets, supposedly, they put mist nets around some hive setups and left others in the same location without them. And those with the mist nets around them were 6.44 times heavier than the unprotected hives. So that's pretty interesting. But there again, it had to be in an area where the birds exist in such sufficient quantity that they were really reducing the number of bees in your apiary. Now another thing was, in areas where the birds that predate on honeybees are, your big concern is that, especially some of these higher flying birds, and they say that Purple martins, for example, fly and catch higher insects, which is why honeybees that are flying lower and traveling to their sites don't generally get picked off very much. The other thing is there's a disproportionate number of drones that get taken out by these birds as opposed to workers. And again, remember where the drone's headed. They're flying higher than the workers and farther because they're going to where the drone congregation areas are, and that's where they get the attention of a lot of these high-flying birds. So, like even in my apiary, barn swallows, especially near the end of the year, they fly through in groups, back and forth, collecting bees as they go through, and it makes me nuts for a little while. But then they move on and they don't do it every day. So, once again, it could be written off as normal attrition for your bees. Because the side benefit of all of this is that these same bird species are taking out a lot of the predators. That's why what these birds feed on through the year starts to change. So near the end of the year, August, September, and probably into October, they're feeding on wasps and late season vespids. So they're actually a huge benefit to our bees because they're taking out their competition. And also because we know yellow jacket wasps will also raid honeybee hives. So we depend on these birds. So don't go to war against the birds. Another thing that they are known to go after, dragonflies. So a lot of people panic when they see dragonflies as well. But anyway, one of the studies showed that when they were raising queens, so when they had queen grow-out yards and they were sending them out for their mating flights, if sufficient numbers of these birds were around, these queens had a 47% chance of returning after a mating flight to the hive that they emitted from. Whereas in the absence of these birds, and again, you're going to have to follow the link to get into which specific bird species we're talking about, but 80% success of virgin queens flying out, getting mated, and making it safely back. Again, those queens are flying higher and farther. So apparently it's a problem for the drones and the queens primarily. They fly higher. So anyway, those are interesting questions, but the other thing was, does the hive visor help? It might, but these birds really aren't attacking the landing board, but in this description, where there's bird droppings all around these pallets and everything, and I tried to find out a specific species that would be feeding on the bees in Missouri, which is where this comes from, and I couldn't find anything other than those that are already on the list. So barn swallows and things like that, but they prefer to feed on the air, on the wing, as they say, and some birds that do catch them, like woodpeckers and things like that. Woodpeckers are after the larvae, but those that were taking bees out of the air and the flycatchers and things like that land to feed. So they're not really feeding on the landing board. So it's kind of a mystery for now, but I really hope that Christy will update us if somebody collects the bird droppings, gets them under a microscope, and sees if they're actually feeding on the bees. And then we need direct observation. If there's so much bird waste around the beehive, then it must be a bird that can be observed. So we need to find out, and if they're skittish around people, consider putting a security camera out there so you can get some really good information. Interesting topic. I hope that somebody knows an ornithologist that is willing to talk to me, that wouldn't mind being on, YouTube, because some people don't want to be out there. So I need somebody that knows about the bees and the birds, and we'll talk about it. Next question, number 4, Robert Fisher from Charleston, West Virginia. A question about strengthening a weak hive. If I put a frame of brood from a strong hive, could I then put a ramp to the weak hive, cover it with a towel, then shake the bees from the strong hive onto it? My thinking is the forager bees would fly back to the original hive, but the nurse bees would go to the weak hive, and then they would worm the brood and eventually become foragers for the new hive. Am I missing something? Yes, you're missing something. Don't just, because it sounds like we have an established hive and they're weak. First of all, we need to find out why they're weak. So we need to know, is there a queen? Are they laying? Is the queen pattern good? Is she healthy? Is everything else in order in that hive? And it's just a matter of you're trying to beef them up. Because no sense putting good bees after bad if other conditions are not good in that hive. Let's say they're good, they're just understocked, and you're trying to give them a boost. You're much more ahead if you pull a frame out of the hive that you're trying to boost and you swap it for a frame of capped brood in the colony that you're pulling from to put them in. Shaking out nurse bees, because it's true that the way it's described here, if we just took a frame from the brood of a colony and we shook them out in front of another hive on a board, on a cloth, the way that's described here, it's true the foragers, those that are already familiar with their environment, that have been out and about, that understand the physical markers, geolocating for that area, and can find their way back to their original hive, no problem. Those that would be lost, that could not find their way back, would be the nurse bees from inside the hive. But see, they're alien to this hive. So if this hive has any defenses at all, they're going to reject these nurse bees. So there is going to be some conflict there, and why put the nurse bees through that? They do tend to get accepted when we put an entire frame of brood in that has the capped cells on it and nurse bees on the frame, because then they come with their own pheromone. Much better chance of acceptance, very little chance of fighting going on then, because it's a sudden addition of a very strong pheromone, not just bees at the landing board that can be repelled for a while by defenders, by the guard bees. So I don't recommend the shake out and see if they'll just walk in there because they have no place to go kind of thing. Much better to fortify them with capped pupa. Those are my thoughts on that. But the other thing is, let's first determine also why the colony is in decline. Let's make sure the queen is healthy and everything else. Question number 5, David Horsley. Will the swarm ever go straight from their original hive into their next home without the bivouac period? I know scouts begin looking at possible cavities well before, how many days ahead, the actual swarm, and why hang on a branch if scouts are strongly recommending a certain cavity? Maybe they can't really waggle dance and vote until they're in bivouac. I don't know. There are a lot of things at play there, and this is based on observation for as long as people have been keeping bees. So we go all the way back. This practice of bivouacking is basically getting the queen that is in lay out of the resident colony with her workers before the new soon-to-hatch queens come out of their cells. So because then there's potential conflict between the new and the existing queens, so they have to get out of there. The other thing is, there's a lot of thought that's gone into this and observations, but one thing we know for sure is that rarely, if ever, and I don't know of any examples of where a swarm has emitted with their queen and gone directly into another cavity. 99.99% of the time, they're going to land on something intermediate to their final destination. And but you're right also, because the scouts for 2 weeks or more, it's been documented, go out and are examining cavities all around the area where the current hive exists. So they do that well in advance. You think, wow, if they have all that information already, wouldn't it be more efficient for them to just fly out and zip straight to their final location? So we don't know the answer to why they don't do it. We just know they don't do it. So they go to the intermediate location, and I don't know if even maybe the size of the swarm has something to do with it. There's a lot of people that have gone out to collect swarms with a single box, and sometimes they just take a nuke with them. Huge mistake. Because if you show up just with a nuke and you end up with 10 pounds of bees hanging on a branch of a tree, you don't have room for them to fit in. So this is just thinking out loud. See what might be going on. Because they don't know what percentage of the workforce of that colony is going to go with the prime swarm, the first swarm in spring, until they get out there and they get on a branch. So maybe, this is just thinking, I don't have a conclusion on this. Maybe once they've all clustered around the queen on the branch and they have a sense, because they are walking the surface of the cluster, maybe they get a sense of how many bees are in that bivouac location that they need to find a home for. And so now the scouts, when they're going out, because what do the scouts do when they find a cavity that they think might be suitable? Because I have swarm traps out right now. They go inside and they spend 15 minutes or more. I mean, who has time to sit out there staring at a swarm trap for 15 minutes or more, waiting for that scout to come back out? I do. So they go in there and spend a lot of time. And what are they doing? They're walking around the surface, all interior surfaces in several directions. This has been observed and studied and traced and documented and everything else. And a great source for this is Dr. Thomas Seeley's Honeybee Democracy. He talks about all of it. But so maybe when they're scouting, now they know how many bees are in that bivouac location. Now they know what size cavity they need to move into, and they're not going to accept a tiny one. And this is where some of the traps, some of the swarm traps I've seen out, I'm not going to name them, they seem somewhat undersized. So we know there's also an optimum size for what the bees would be moving into, and it's pretty close to a 10-frame deep standard Langstroth box. So, and that's pretty close to a 10-gallon. Like, think of a 10-gallon fish tank. That's kind of the space, that's the minimum. So some of the new swarm traps that are going out are a little undersized for that. Now, if that bivouac location, if they're small, they just need almost any cavity they can move into, and smaller would benefit them. So, but as far as they ever fly direct, they don't. But as far as what's going on while they're hanging in the bivouac location is, they're waiting for several scouts to come back with the same information. They walk around the surface of the cluster, and then eventually you'll see it looks like a flash mob happened. And the waggle dancing starts happening on all surfaces because they need to communicate to all the bees at once. And when you see the same waggle dance being performed on all sides, same jig to the left and they turn to the right, and they jig horizontal, then they turn to the left and they jig to the right. And if you see them all doing the exact same patterns, then you know that they're all sending out the same information. And it's very cool to watch, and if you're explaining it to someone when it happens, it's a lot of fun. And we had a cluster of bees bivouacked on grapevines. And a bunch of people were there watching because we wanted them to go into a very specific box. And we know that the waggle dance is related to the position of the sun. And when they started doing waggle dances, they did their little turn and they went straight down. It was a very short waggle, which indicates their destination is pretty close. Then they went the other way and they went straight down. Then they went the other way and they went straight down. Well, if they're going straight down, then that's 180 degrees out from the direction of the sun. So that meant, look at the shadow of the post that was supporting the grapevines. The shadow cast was directly towards the spot that we had set up for them to go to. And so when I explained what the waggle dance was, and they're actually communicating the location of that box right there, it made people think I was like a honeybee genius. Because where did they all end up going? Right into that box. It was a great opportunity to explain the waggle dance, how they found what they wanted, how they communicated, how the scouts were going in there. Because the more scouts we had coming and going, the better it was. The more they had campaigning for that location. And I will admit, too, that I cheated. That's right. When I saw bees coming back to that swarm, because I really wanted it to happen in my favor, I messed with their election. So when I saw one on the surface giving its waggle dance, that's a scout, it's one, doing it all by itself. I would scoop that one up with the bees under it. So I got the scout, and I got the other bees that were on the surface paying attention to it, because I figured, they must be scouts too. They're just getting the information so they could go check it out also. And I'd scoop them and I'd walk them over to the hive we want them to go into. And I'd put them on the landing board and they all went in and started inspecting. And I kept doing that. Every time I saw doing waggle dances, little scouts on the surface of that bivouac location, I'd scoop them up and I'd go put them in the box too. And eventually I organized their election process so that my information was the only information that was dominant going to that cluster, and then pretty soon they all started sending out the information I wanted them to send out, and it worked. So if you do something like that, you want to look smart to your friends, and you want to meddle with honeybee democracies, it is a lot of fun to collect scouts and put them in boxes that you hope that you can get them to approve of, and then abandon their ideas about wherever the heck else it was they were thinking of going. Question number 6. Les Hayden, Bath, Michigan. It says, my question about the composition of the frames for new hives. I have 2 nukes arriving Tuesday. This will be my first year beekeeping. I completed the Heroes to Hives program last year and have been listening to your Q&A. So Heroes to Hives, great program. Thank you for your service, by the way. There's also a national program, Hives to Heroes. Check them both out. So anyway, I have decided to use 10 frame deep hive bodies. I was planning to add better comb to the nuke frames to give the girls a boost getting started. I started thinking about using a mix of better comb and a couple of black foundation to try and get them to start drawing their own comb. Do you think that is a good idea, or should I just stick with the better comb? Okay, so here's the thing. Better comb, for those of you who don't know, there is a video about it. In fact, I'll put a link to show you what it is. Better comb is a synthetic, pre-drawn comb that lets your bees get started soon. And I'm not going to recommend it gets used in this instant, and I'll explain why. We have a nucleus colony, and when you buy a nucleus of bees, you already have frames of drawn comb, you already have brood, you already have resources. Usually it's 5 frames, hopefully 5 deep frames, and that's what's described here, deep frames. So I think you're set. I wouldn't waste better comb in this setup because you can put, you mentioned black foundation. I'm just going to assume there's a heavy wax black foundation. And my favorite is Acorn. Premier has come out this year as well. I think they're going to probably promote or perform equally. They're heavy wax. They kind of look similar. So if you've got that, I would just put that in outside of the 5 frames that you're going to put in your box. Just put those heavy wax foundation because they have everything they need. When they have 5 frames, that's enough for a substantial number of bees. We know that because you're setting up a new colony there, you're going to start feeding them probably 1-to-1 sugar syrup this time of year. And they will be able to build out their wax on their own. So I think hold the better comb in this case. Put in the heavy waxed plastic foundation that you're describing. And I think you're going to find out that they do really well. The only things I use better comb for, definitely like late in the year when you collect a swarm, they don't have time to build a bunch of infrastructure, and you don't have a bunch of drawn comb to give them. A new swarm could benefit heavily from better comb and a package of bees that you get. Like, look what's going on right now. We have rain day after day after day. We have rain with a side of rain with a main order of rain followed by rain with rain for dessert. That's what we have going on right now. So it's terrible. The bees are flying in the rain because they have to. It just happens to be warm enough. So if it's in the 50s or better, yesterday it hit the 60s. That was awesome. But we had one clear day and the bees were flying heavy. And I had to tell the Amish guys that were building my Way to Bee Academy building that if they had any concerns about bees, don't worry. If there's a swarm, I'm just going to collect them. Don't worry about it and keep going. So we didn't get any swarms yesterday. But when you're not hiving a colony that needs help like that, I wouldn't use better comb. So swarm collections, packages, things like that that need the boost. Otherwise, I think you're good to go. And welcome to the Heroes to Hives program. I'm glad that was a success, by the way. And next question, number 7, comes from Nathan, Hobart, Tasmania, Australia. So I'm a fan of slatted racks, and I'm building a long Langstroth hive and was wondering about adding an equivalent internal rack underneath the frames. What are your thoughts on adding an internal slatted rack, even if it was just under the brood area? Or do you think a tunnel entrance or hive gate would suffice to restrict airflow? The open bottom of the hive makes sense for rapid bee access to the far frames, but seems potential liability for winter. Okay, so here's the thing. Slatted racks, we have to go back to what the purpose of it is. And so now we're in a horizontal hive format, hopefully with a single entrance. And when you put slatted racks in, the reason they work on the Langstroth vertical configuration is because the slatted rack is 2 inches thick generally. And they have the slats that run in line with the frames directly above them, and they take up bee space, and then there's a leading board at the entrance. So it creates some darkness there. It creates some space, and the point is to get your bees to work the frames in your bottom box all the way down to the bottom of the frame, and for your queen to lay eggs in every cell all the way to the bottom. where often without the slatted rack, without that spacer there, those frames get used, 3/4 of the way, and then at the bottom they don't tend to finish things out and they don't tend to put brood right there, and that's because the entrance is right there. So if this is the entrance and we put in a slatted rack, now your brood starts up here. Does it work to get the queen and the workers to finish drawing out comb all the way down and to use those cells? It does. So it works for that. But now we're in a horizontal format and you have your entrance at one end, and we know that your brood is going to be concentrated near the entrance. So the first 5 frames, let's say. Putting a slatted rack underneath, unless your entrance is at the bottom and you're trying to create that space, I don't see a need for a slatted rack in a horizontal hive configuration. So I can't think of a practical reason to have it in there. It's something that from time to time you would have to remove to clean out from underneath, or to at least inspect to see what's going on. Bees often do build drone comb underneath the slats and things like that. But for a horizontal hive, I would not recommend doing that. It doesn't mean you can't. It's just, personally, if I'm setting up a horizontal hive, would I do it? I personally wouldn't. There's some that would. And we do have horizontal hive designs and plans with and without, by the way, because the guy that did all the CAD drawings and stuff for my horizontal hive plans, I think did provide options for slatted racks, grates, and screens underneath. So removable trays and things like that, part of integrated pest management. So look at those. I'll put a link to those plans. They're 100% free. You can look them over, use them if you want to. But I'll put a link there and you can check those out because there are options for that. Personally, I was not keen on, unless it's a vertical configuration, I don't see the bigger benefit of having that extra configuration in there. Question number 8 comes from Donald, Oberlin, Ohio. I've installed my first 2 packages. I'm deeply in love with my bees. That is not rare. People get fixated on their bees, which is why it's such a tragedy when something happens to them. However, I've already noticed more than a few varroa mites on the screen bottom board backers after the very first inspection. When was that very first inspection? Let's see, I find this surprising because when I got the bees, Saskatraz, from the supplier, they offered to do a vaporized treatment on the package in the bee bus. Now it says they offered to do it, so my question is, did they actually do the treatment? If they offered to do it, you have to say, yeah, I want that done. So I didn't expect to see these little bloodsuckers show up so soon after being treated and not having any brood cells. Was I ripped off? Should I train my bees to attack their apiary? Am I slightly overreacting? Okay. So if you're sending seller, whoever they are, I don't know of too many people that ship and sell Saskatraz packages, so I can guess who it might be, but I'm not going to name the company. But they're pretty good at sending clean packages. So if somebody's selling you a package of bees, always ask, are you treating them before they leave? Because if not, once you receive them, you've got about 9 days or better, easily 9 days, where at that 9th day, you can treat with oxalic acid vaporization and knock out more than 95% of those mites because they're all phoretic. That means they're on the surface, they can't hide, they get killed. It is weird because where were these mites found? Not on the bees, they're on the bottom board. That means these mites are dying of old age. So, mites can live 4 months. So we've got mites that didn't just die of old age after coming into this colony and reproducing here and getting started because there isn't even brood activity here yet. So yeah, I would not personally be super happy about that, but the good news is if you have all uncapped brood right now, oxalic acid vaporization treatment. That's exactly what I would do. But yeah, if somebody gives you the option, you want these treated before we ship them out, absolutely we do. So question number 9. T.W. Barton. Sunflowers are great planting for pollinators and for us to look at, but make sure you're not buying pre-cut sunflowers. I'm sorry, pro-cut sunflowers. They have been specifically bred free of pollen used in flower farming industry. Okay, and that's true. I say this all the time. We're saying again because a lot of people are getting ready to plant their sunflowers. I am. And you definitely want the ones that are loaded with pollen. You want the ones that are loaded as part of your pollinator-friendly planting groups. So a lot of these websites, Ernst Seeds, Eden Brothers, which are a favorite of mine, when you go there, they have the pollinator groups, and we know that those are the sunflowers that have pollen on them. Why on earth would a company produce sunflowers that don't have pollen on them? Because those that like to cut the sunflowers and put them in arrangements on their kitchen table and their dining table and stuff like that, they don't want a bunch of pollen falling all over the table, so it has its appeal. And that's probably why they're called pro-cut flowers. Because flowers without pollen do well, they don't mess everything up. They're not good for the bees. So, definitely, word of the wise there. When you're shopping for your sunflower seed, if you're growing them for your bees, make sure that they're loaded with pollen. Question number 10. Zen White Noise is the YouTube channel name. Do bee stings kill all bees or only certain species or none? Do bees understand that stings kill them, assuming stings kill bees? If bees smell a scent in the air telling other bees to attack, how did the first bee know to attack before a scent was in the air to begin with? How do bees determine a threat, and what distance from their hive causes them to feel threatened and sting you? That's a lot there, by the way. But what are the bees? First of all, can bees sting other bees and kill other bees? Yes. Bee-to-bee combat happens all the time, and bees sting other bees and kill them. Sometimes bees even sting and kill within their own colony. Can you think of an example when that might happen? Absolutely. They drag out, for example, the drones in the fall or anytime there's a major dearth. A dearth is when there's a lack of resources in the environment and the bees that are resident to the colony are taking stock in everything they have and getting rid of the dead weight including male bees, the drones. I have seen bees drag out male bees, so they're dragging drones out onto the landing board, and I've seen drones that continue to try to get back in. And then I've seen bees gang up on them and sting them to death. So, worker bees stinging drones to death. And that's just insult to injury right there. They're already being cast out. The other thing is we know for sure, bees, if they're guard bees on the landing board primarily too, when bees from other colonies land and try to get in, they sting and kill those from other colonies that don't belong. And I'm writing down here that I'm going to link a video that shows honeybees being attacked by wasps. The wasps getting inside under the hive and through the entrance at the bottom, and then the resident bees stinging and killing wasps. And at the end of the day, there was a huge pile of dead wasps in front of the beehive. The bees, honeybees in particular, don't have mandibles that are strong enough to attack, bite, and pull apart other insects. Some of the wasps definitely do, and hornets do. They have mandibles that are designed to cut meat. They can eat carrion. So they can actually bite apart and chew apart other bees and wasps. But honeybees can't do that. So they sting them to death and drag them out and kick them out of the hive, and then you have a pile of dead wasps. So honeybee stings can kill vespids. And likewise, vespids can kill honeybees because those that are defending, when they get entangled with a wasp to bee combat, one of them's dying. So yes, the venoms work across the board on each other. So the other thing is, how do they know to attack? Guard bees are watching for unfamiliar animals. And remember that animals are anything in the animal kingdom. So that would include birds, that would include people, that would include other insects that land on the landing board. And when you see guard bees with their forelimbs up and they like randomly grab at other bees and insects landing on the landing board before they get a chance to go through, their mandibles are open too because they have an opportunity with their mandibles to scent mark. So they can also bite, scent mark, and get the other bees to identify that. So when you don't have the proper scent that says that you're a member of this club and you bring the scent in from another club, you get rejected. Now if you don't cut out and leave when you're rejected and you still try to get in, one of the guard bees, last resort, will bite you and start stinging you right away. So then we're rolling around. They avoid stinging each other. They prefer to bite and harass each other because you'll see guard bees biting on the appendages of the unwelcome bee. They'll bite on their wings, they bite on their little antennae and everything else, and I've never seen them successfully pull these parts off. So then if that doesn't work and they don't rout them away that way, now they resort to stinging, and that's when we have dead bees. That's how we know when robbing is going on. It starts off with layers of dead bees on the landing board, dead and dying. And those are the guard bees. And as the guard bees begin to become defeated, we start to reduce ourselves to bees inside the colony trying to defend that are not as tough and as mature and as capable of guarding the hive as those that have been defeated on the landing board. And then it breaks down, and that's why sometimes when there's robbing going on, it's been going on for a day or more, you see very little defense at the landing board anymore, and that's because the guards are gone. Nurse bees, as we know, they're terrible defenders, they're softies, they're easily overrun, and they seem to just not react anymore because they just can't. So when the guard bees react, they're the ones that release what's called the alarm pheromone. So they can do that by biting and marking with their mandibles. They can also do that when they sting, because when insects are stinging insects, they don't often lose their stingers the way we do. I mean, the way they do when they sting a mammal. Because if it's got skin, because we don't have exoskeletons, when a stinger goes into us, it actually has a serrated edge that goes in there that pulls it into your skin and causes it to rip out of the abdomen. So when they're doing that to other insects, it doesn't get stuck in the same way. That's when they end up being able to sting over and over. Wasps do not have those barbs on their stingers, so they can sting just like a sewing machine and get away with it. So insect to insect, they don't lose their stingers as often. Insect to mammal, they lose their stingers, they die. So it's 1 bee per sting. But they spread the alarm pheromone. And then now the next question was, at what distance will they attack? Well, that depends on what's going on. So once they're alerted and there is an alarm, if a bee flies out, my grandson does this. He has mittens that he wears with his bee suit. And when he gets a bee to sting his mitten, you'll see pretty soon several stingers around that initial stinger on the mitten. And that's because the stinger gets an alarm pheromone on it as it leaves the bee. And then the little muscle and the venom gland goes with it and continues to contract and push venom in there. So it's multi-layered. One is that it has an alarm pheromone, or let's call it a targeting pheromone. That other bees from that same colony will recognize that as the threat, and that's why they sting in the same spot. So I don't know if you've ever been stung while you're working around a beehive or something, exposed skin, you get stung, and pretty soon you get 5 or 6 stings within a couple inches of each other, and that's because it becomes the targeting mechanism. So, line of sight. Once they're on alert and things are going bad for the bees and they get really defensive, and then we get into Africanized bees, they'll fly 100 yards to go after anything moving. Once they're alerted, once the alarm pheromone goes out, they disproportionately respond. So a lot more bees leave an Africanized colony and they go after every moving thing. So now they're targeting any living thing that's not a bee from their colony. So that's an extreme in the other direction. But for normal colonies, it's within 50 feet generally. And then you should be able to walk away. But interesting question. I hope I explained it. Question number 11, Brad Wamsley, Chester, New Hampshire. Have you ever tried fluorescent acrylic paint to mark your queen? Talking with my local beekeeping supplier, I asked if she ever heard of anyone doing so. She said no. Seemed to make sense for easier and quicker ID of the queen. I tried it and wow. I wish Brad had sent me a link of what one he preferred. But yeah, when it comes to, and there are people marking with fluorescence, and there are a lot of things that you can do, by the way. If you're one of these people that just has a terrible time picking out your bees, there's something called a PIDAR. And I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a special spectrum flashlight and it shines blue. And it's so that you can see if you've got pets in your house, cats, dogs, whatever, do not get one of those unless you really want to know where they've been peeing and marking corners by staircases, little throw rugs and things like that. You'll find out where your pets have been going because the PEDAR shows through this fluorescent light spectrum exactly what's going on. Another reason is for having that is that you'll know for sure that you've cleaned it up. So it's part of an enzyme activated pet cleaning system. The reason I bring it up is if you really want to see where the queen is, for example, fluorescence would be fine. But if you're marking with white, for example, or even yellow, that you use the PEDAR. And you can test this by marking on pieces of wood and things like that. Then you take that little flashlight and shine it, and you could hit a whole frame of bees, and immediately the thing that lights up is going to be the queen. So yeah, you can use any color you want also. So I recommend picking the color that looks good to you. You're not a breeder. The important part is for you to keep a log and know what colors mean what years for you. And the fluorescents are out there. But there are other options that help you identify the painted or marked queen. So, interesting question. I do believe there's other information already out there from people who are using fluorescents to mark their queens. And it's the alcohol-based paints that dry the quickest that mark them. And because if you get into the enamels and stuff, the smells are stronger, it takes longer to harden and things like that. Question number 12. Calvin from Fayetteville, PA. Looking for a good rule of thumb, both for removing pollen and feed and putting on honey supers. Since I've had a hive swarm a few days ago, it's my thinking that if they have enough resources to swarm, they don't need mine anymore. That's true. So the question is, first of all, I don't put feed on all my colonies, except the one exception is going to be going forward, by the way. Last year I put 50% Hive Alive fondant on all of my colonies. So 50% of the colonies had Hive Alive for winter, and 50% had dry sugar. And as it turned out, I didn't even get the dry sugar on some of the colonies. But those with the Hive Alive fondant on them did extremely well. So, but the thing is, now we're into spring. Look at all the rainy weather we have and everything. It's worth leaving that stuff on, especially if they didn't finish up their packets. But when it comes to shifting over to sugar syrup, where would I put that? I don't feed any of the colonies that made it to spring with sugar syrup. None of them. I would only put it on if I collected a swarm to get them started. For those of you who have purchased packages and things like that, that's when you add that on. But yeah, dandelions are in bloom everywhere. For us, when dandelions are opening across fields, that's the shutdown time. It's also the time when we have to start supering, so I don't have sugar syrup on any of my hives. And so yeah, it's a good time. If they're building up good enough and the resources are kicking in for the environment, it's time for backyard beekeepers, let them find their own resources. Because there again, it's a distinction between backyard and commercial beekeeping. If I'm a commercial beekeeper, I probably would have feed on every colony. Because I need the numbers, I need the buildup, I need everything else. Backyard beekeeping, I'd rather go for quality over quantity and keep the colonies smaller. In fact, that might reduce with all this rain and everything that we're having. You would think none of these colonies would be ready to swarm. Well, the polar opposite is true. Their numbers based on landing board activity have to be way up. The amount of pollen going into these colonies is ridiculous, and that's why I really needed today to be a nice, warm, clean, sunny, dry day. It's not. But I would not feed at all unless you're starting, as I described. I would not provide syrup at all. It's time to pull off. The other thing is the Hive Alive, they put out pollen patties that are made by Global Patties? Yeah. Which was the formula that was tested by Randy Oliver that did so well. So those that have been using that, those reports are really good. But I have to say that I don't have personal experience with it because I put no pollen patties on any of my hives because we had enough pollen coming in on any day where it was warm enough for them to forage. I much prefer letting the bees find their own stuff than to try to beef them up on my own. If I had a commercial commitment, I would be feeding everything, and then the argument there is that you'll hear from other beekeepers, put the syrup on anyway, and if they don't need it, they won't use it, and if they need it, they'll use it. So there's some truth to that, but I just don't need to put on what I don't need to put on. So there's that part. Question number 13, Scott Mingo, Attleboro, Massachusetts. My question is about a hive that has recently swarmed. Is it possible to add a mated queen several days after the hive has swarmed? And if so, what would the process be? You could add a mated queen several days after a hive swarms, but chances are the reason they swarmed in the first place is they're making replacement queens. And since they swarm out just days usually before a virgin queen emerges from her queen cell, and usually multiple queen cells are there, I see no reason to buy in and introduce another one because you risk a conflict there. Because they're really not queenless. They have queens in the making, and you're only, a week to 2 weeks out from having a mated queen in there that's going to start laying again if they fly out and don't get munched by one of the birds that we talked about earlier. And I would wait and see, especially if it's been a really good performing colony. Why not keep the genetics going? Let them fly out and mate with whoever and come back and see what they're doing there. But the question is it possible? So it is possible, and you do save time. But now what you have to do is get in there once they've swarmed, and you have to actively search every single frame. You have to smash or remove every single queen cell. You have to make sure that there are no eggs in that hive, because they can make another one from that. Then you can bring in your legged mating queen and your laying queen that's been mated. So you can install that, and then you'll know the genetics, and that way you'll control your whole colony of bees. And it's immediate, so you do save time, and you're saving thousands of bees. In other words, for every day that your queens that are in production now are not laying while they're maturing, while they're flying out to mate and everything else, you're losing over 1,000 potential new bees every single day. So by bringing one in that's mated and in lay, you're ahead of the game. So you could do that, but you got to make sure that there's no competition already there. It would really stink if you brought in a queen that you bought, let's say it's from Bee Weaver. I'm just saying that because that's where I would buy my queen if I needed one. Then you potentially risk losing that queen too. There can even be a swarm. So get rid of them. And how long do you have before they would make a replacement anyway, before you get like laying workers, before things are really messed up? 3 weeks, remember? It's how long it takes for the workers to activate their ovaries. Question number 14. Do I really have 14 questions? Holy cow. Calvin Edwards, Fayetteville, PA. I'm looking for a good rule of thumb for both removing pollen feed. Oops, I already did that. Did Calvin get printed twice? Sure did. Guess what? I'm done. I don't have 14 questions. I have 13, so we're already in the fluff zone. I almost did that question again. So, in the fluff, first of all, I forgot to do a shout out last week. So this week I'm doing a shout out. The shout out is for a survey that's been put out. I noticed I put this survey on Facebook, and like 2 people responded to it. The survey is about accessible beekeeping. And this is by Dr. Brian Wentz and Justin Ruger. For those of you who don't remember, Justin Ruger is the one, he's the author of Henry Meets a Honeybee, and he's got a couple other books out too for children. So if you look up Justin Ruger, but it's about beekeepers with disabilities. So I'm going to put this link down in the video description. They want a survey, and this is for people with disabilities, not just mobility, for example, paraplegics and things like that, but people that are deaf, for example. So the survey is going to be beneficial. They're a nonprofit organization. Please follow the link, and I highly recommend that you share the link. And it's really weird because nobody seems to want to look at it even, at least on social media. So that's my shout out for today. Why not help people that have accessibility issues but want to keep bees? I think it's really cool. The other thing is, after this is over with, stick around, watch the time lapse of the Way to Bee Academy being framed up, and do the survey. So make preparations for collecting swarms, people, because they are going to happen. The other thing, I do want to give a second shout out. I don't know if you watch, most people do, Ian Stepler, the Canadian beekeeper's blog. Or maybe it's vlog. I don't know. Ian Stepler's YouTube channel. Go and look at it. He has had flooding and all kinds of problems with his hives this spring. And I don't have a lot of time to look at other videos and everything, but that one showed up in my feed. And I think half his hives that he had already put out, he has a big building that he ventilates, that he controls through winter so that his bees can survive in that climate where bees don't make it on their own. And he's a commercial beekeeper, and he put out, I don't know how many 100 hives in a field that later flooded and washed out his bees. If you want to be, if you're complaining about your current situation in beekeeping because, like me, it's raining for days or whatever, if you think your problems are rough, you got to go and look at Ian, because you will feel better about your situation once you've seen what he is dealing with. Also, please take a moment to give a shout out to Ian, you know, words of encouragement, stuff like that. Every little bit helps, because I don't know how he's keeping his, I don't know how morale is kept up in that. It's just like he's just getting punch after punch with his bees, and the numbers are not minute. You know, we're talking big quantities of losses here. I did ask if he has farmer's insurance and stuff like that, but of course he didn't answer that. No big surprise, because there's probably piles of people commenting on his videos right now. But please go there, send words of encouragement, see what you can do, you know. But devastating what's going on there in Canada. So that's it. Sorry to end on a down note, but be ready. Spring is here. Things are blooming. All we need is for it to warm up and for the rain to subside. Other people are in the path of heavy storms right now through the Midwest and then going on into the Northeast. Crazy stuff. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and I want to thank you for spending part of it with me right here. Have a great day. And now for the bonus round. That's right, the Way to Bee Academy is being built. See those 4 stakes on the ground? You're about to see a building go up right there. Built by the Amish. 14 by 24 feet. Now normally you can't video Amish people, but these guys said as long as their faces aren't going to be shown in close-ups, they're fine with me. So I thought that would be great. So here we go, start to finish. They dug holes below the frost line. They did use a gas-powered motor there. Got the auger down, put some concrete in, and sunk 4 by 6 inch pressure treated posts. So the whole building's going to go up on this. All the lumber they're using was milled by their lumber mill. And of course, these are Pennsylvania Amish. Putting in the floor joists there, the rim joists, doing everything by hand, running around, putting down the plywood decking. 5/8 of an inch thick, I believe. Maybe it's 3/4. I could be wrong. Then they're putting together the walls, and it looks like T111 style siding. And the end that we're on here is the porch end. And there's my small bee shed behind it. Going to be dwarfed by this one. Of course, the guy's putting everything together. The youngest Amish worker here was 15 years old, and they all smoked. Cigars, pipes. They roll their own cigars, and they buy their loose leaf tobacco themselves. Pretty interesting. Look at the guy on top there. He just walked around on top of the 2x4 walls. Later he picked up a chainsaw. Did not make me nervous at all. They cut away the details and trim. That was the youngest of the group. Putting the trim on the windows there. We got open ceilings through the middle. The guy in the blue there smoking his pipe. only one of them had a full beard. I asked the other one, the middle guy, how come you don't have a beard? Does it mean something? He said, yeah, it means I can't grow a beard. Oh, so we had some are whiskers. Some are here, some are there. Now they're on break. See? Then after they finish their break, and they don't eat very healthy food either. They had like ding-dongs and stuff from the quick shop. And they drink soda and everything, and then they go right back to work. Put on the roof. The roof is going to be metal, of course. And the windows that you see there, that's going to be my desk space where my office is going to be, and we're going to teach about beekeeping in here, and there's going to be observation hives. Look at this guy walking around on top just like it's nothing. He almost fell a couple of times, but almost is the same as didn't fall at all. So they've had some pretty interesting builds. They built this whole thing on site, and what we're watching took place in a single day from start to finish. 3 Amish guys. The guy in the baseball hat is the one that delivered them in his truck, because they don't drive places. They have horses. So we got the drip edge on. We got this blue barrier that goes up there that they tell me prevents condensation from dripping down inside the building from the metal roof. That's interesting too. So it's all trimmed out. We're at the high side here. The lot is sloped. So at the low end there, which you can't see from this vantage point, is high enough off the ground to park your trailer and things like that. Put equipment underneath. Now they cleaned everything up. Look at that. They even swept it. Put a doorknob in there. This building locks. And I have 6 dormers facing south. I'll have to show you that at a later date. So that was it, start to finish, and they're all gone. Now there's nothing left but to walk around and check it out. I'm going to finish the interior myself. My daughter is going to paint the interior. And that high ceiling, we'll give you a walkthrough later on, but I thought it would be fun to show the time lapse and see how they put the whole thing together in a day. So, on Wednesday it was pouring rain. Thursday, it didn't rain at all. They built this, and then today we're right back to rain again. And that's me showing my nephew around. He was impressed. Have a great weekend.